The Lost Journals of Moria. Chapter 1, Shadows of the Deep. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows across the ancient stone walls, illuminating centuries-old runes that told tales of glory and riches beyond measure. Balin, son of Fundin, stood contemplative before the massive stone doors leading to yet another unexplored chamber of Khazad-dûm. His weathered hands traced the intricate patterns carved into the stone, feeling the pulse of history beneath his fingertips. "My lord," called Ori, breaking the solemn silence. The young dwarf scribe approached with a leather-bound journal tucked under his arm, his beard braided neatly with silver clasps that clinked softly as he walked. "The eastern passages have been secured. Floy believes we might have found traces of mithril." Balin's eyes lit up, though the weariness remained etched into his face. 5 years they had been here, reclaiming their ancestral home from darkness and abandonment. 5 years of hard-fought victories and haunting losses. "Show me your records, Ori," Balin commanded, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. The older dwarf had come to rely on Ori's meticulous documentation of their reclamation efforts. Every discovery, every setback, every fallen comrade, all preserved in ink and parchment. Ori opened the journal, its pages yellowed and filled with his elegant script. "We've mapped 3 new levels below the 21st hall," he explained, pointing to a detailed sketch. "But there's something strange about the markings we found near the lower mines." Balin leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he studied the copied inscriptions. "These are old, older than Durin's time, perhaps." "That's what troubles me," Ori admitted. "They don't match any dialect I know." A voice called out from behind them, young and eager. "Perhaps I could help with those, Lord Balin." Both dwarves turned to see Nari, grandson of Dori, approaching with a torch in hand. Though barely into his 80th year, the young dwarf had proven himself an able explorer and a keen student of ancient languages, a skill that had become increasingly valuable as they ventured deeper into Moria's forgotten reaches. "Ah, young Nari," Balin greeted him warmly, always appearing when talk turns to mysteries. Nari bowed respectfully. "My grandfather sends word. The expedition to the lower western halls has returned. They found something unusual." The urgency in the young dwarf's voice caught Balin's attention immediately. "What kind of unusual?" "A chamber, my lord, untouched since the fall of Khazad-dûm, and within it, a stone chest bearing the seal of Narvi." Ori's quill, which had been scratching across a fresh page, stopped abruptly. "Narvi, the craftsman who worked with Celebrimbor on the west gate." "The very same," Nari confirmed, his eyes wide with excitement. "They dare not open it without you present." Balin stroked his white beard thoughtfully. Narvi was a legendary figure among dwarves, his craftsmanship unparalleled even by today's standards. Any artifact bearing his mark would be of immeasurable historical significance. "Lead on, then," Balin decided. "Ori, bring your journals. This is something worth recording." The 3 dwarves traveled through the vast halls of Khazad-dûm, their footsteps echoing against stone that had witnessed the rise and fall of the greatest dwarf kingdom in Middle-earth. Ori couldn't help but record mental notes of their journey. The newly restored pillars in the chamber of Mazarbul, the fresh mineshafts branching off from ancient tunnels, the bustling forges where dwarven craftsmen worked day and night to restore Moria to its former glory. After descending several winding staircases and traversing long corridors, they arrived at a small encampment where a group of dust-covered dwarves sat resting. At their center, placed carefully on a cloth, sat a stone chest no larger than a helmeted dwarf's head. "My lord Balin," the expedition leader, Floy, greeted them with a bow. "We found it sealed in a wall cavity behind a panel marked with Durin's crest." Balin approached reverently, kneeling before the chest despite his aging joints. The seal was unmistakable, Narvi's distinctive geometric pattern intertwined with elvish lettering, a testament to the rare friendship between dwarves and elves during the Second Age. "Has anyone attempted to open it?" Balin asked, examining the chest from all angles. "No, my lord," Floy assured him, though Lonnie believes there may be a hidden mechanism rather than a key. As if summoned by his name, Lonnie stepped forward. Though young by dwarf standards, his reputation as a masterful locksmith had earned him a place in this expedition. "The craftsmanship is exquisite," he explained, pointing to nearly invisible seams along the chest's edges. "It's designed to open only when specific points are pressed in sequence." Ori immediately began sketching the chest in his journal, recording every detail with practiced precision. "The elvish script," he murmured. "It speaks of wisdom forgotten and secrets kept." A hush fell over the gathered dwarves as Balin ran his fingers along the chest's surface, feeling for the mechanism Lonnie had described. "In the days of Durin and Celebrimbor," he said softly, "dwarf and elf worked together to create wonders. Perhaps this chest was meant to be opened by both races together." Nari, who had been studying the elvish script intently, suddenly pointed to a small symbol near the lock. "This mark here, it's not elvish at all. It's an ancient Khazad-dûm rune representing Durin's day." Balin nodded appreciatively at the young dwarf's observation. "Good eye, lad. And what might that tell us about opening this chest?" Nari hesitated, thinking carefully before answering. "On Durin's day, when the last light of autumn shines, perhaps the mechanism responds to light." "Bring your torches closer," Balin commanded. As the flames illuminated the chest from different angles, a faint pattern emerged on its surface. Lines and symbols previously invisible now glowed with a pale blue light, reminiscent of the hidden door to Erebor that Thorin's company had discovered decades ago. "Just as I thought," Balin murmured, a smile forming beneath his white beard. "Moon runes. Lonnie, your fingers are more nimble than mine. Follow the pattern as it appears." The young locksmith carefully traced the glowing lines, pressing at specific intersections. With each correct pressure point, a soft click echoed from within the chest. After the seventh click, the lid loosened with a release of ancient air. Ori's quill moved frantically across his journal, capturing the historic moment. The gathered dwarves leaned forward in anticipation as Balin slowly lifted the chest's lid. Inside, wrapped in shimmering cloth that had somehow resisted the decay of time, lay a small book bound in deep blue leather and a curious metal object that resembled a compass, but with unfamiliar markings around its edge. "By Mahal's hammer," Floy whispered, voicing the awe that had struck them all silent. Balin carefully lifted the book, unwrapping it with reverent hands. The pages within were made of a material none of them recognized, neither paper nor parchment, but something that had preserved the writing perfectly through the ages. The script alternated between flowing elvish and bold Khazad-dûm runes. "What is it, my lord?" Ori asked, his journal momentarily forgotten as curiosity overtook him. Balin's eyes widened as he scanned the first page. "It appears to be a guide, written jointly by Narvi and Celebrimbor." He looked up, meeting the eager gazes of his fellow dwarves. "A guide to something hidden in the deepest reaches of Khazad-dûm, something they called the heart of the mountain." Nari's voice was barely audible as he asked, "Not another Arkenstone?" "No," Balin replied, turning the page carefully. "Something far older. According to this, during the construction of Khazad-dûm, Durin the Deathless discovered something in the depths, something that predated even the awakening of the dwarves." A chill seemed to pass through the chamber, despite the warmth of the torches. The dwarves exchanged uneasy glances, for they all knew the tales of what else lurked in the deep places of the world. "Does it say what this heart is?" Ori asked, his quill poised once more above his journal. Balin shook his head. "Not explicitly, but it speaks of great power and ancient wisdom. He lifted the compass-like object from the chest, and it seems this instrument was crafted to help find it. As Balin held the device aloft, its needle spun briefly before settling, pointing downward at an angle deeper into the mountain. The blue glow that had illuminated the chest's runes now emanated from the device itself, casting an eerie light across the gathered faces. "We should proceed with caution," Ori advised, ever the voice of prudence. "Our colony is still establishing itself. Perhaps this exploration could wait until—" "Until what?" interrupted Floy, excitement overcoming his usual respect for hierarchy. "Until the elves come claiming what their ancestors helped create. Until we lose this opportunity to discover something that could elevate Khazad-dûm beyond even its former glory." Balin raised a hand for silence, his expression grave yet determined. "Both perspectives have merit. We cannot rush blindly after ancient powers. That path has led our people to ruin before." His eyes flicked momentarily to Nari, whose gray tuncle had been among those who followed Thorin to reclaim Erebor and its Arkenstone. "Yet neither can we ignore what Mahal has clearly placed in our path." He closed the book carefully and rewrapped it in its protective cloth. "We will study this journal thoroughly before taking any action. Ori, this task falls to you and young Nari. Translate every word, understand every diagram. Leave nothing to assumption or guesswork." Ori nodded solemnly, accepting both the journal and the tremendous responsibility it represented. "And the compass, my lord." Balin considered the glowing device in his hand. "This I will keep safe until we know its full purpose. For now, speak of this discovery only to those present here. The shadows in Khazad-dûm are many, and not all secrets are meant for all ears." As the dwarves began to pack up their camp, Balin stood apart, staring into the darkness that stretched beyond their torchlight. Somewhere in those depths lay whatever Narvi and Celebrimbor had deemed important enough to hide away with such care. But the deep places of Moria held other things too, things that had claimed the kingdom once before. The compass in his pocket pulsed with blue light, calling them downward into the ancient dark. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The chamber of Mazarbul had been transformed into a makeshift study. Scrolls and maps spread across the stone table that dominated its center. Lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over Ori as he hunched over the blue-bound journal, carefully translating each page onto fresh parchment. 3 days had passed since the discovery of Narvi's chest, and the scribe had barely slept, driven by a mixture of scholarly curiosity and growing unease. "The script changes here," Ori muttered to himself, tracing a finger along the ancient text. Celebrimbor's hand gives way to Narvi's. The tone shifts as well. Nari entered the chamber, carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and a mug of ale. "You missed another meal," he said, setting the tray beside Ori's workspace. "Lord Balin says you'll be of no use to anyone if you collapse from hunger." Ori straightened his back, wincing at the stiffness in his shoulders. "I've found something concerning," he said, pushing aside his translation to reveal the original journal. "Look at these passages." Celebrimbor writes with excitement about their discovery, but Narvi's entries grow increasingly cautious, even fearful. Nari leaned over to examine the page, his young eyes better suited to the dim light than Ori's. "This symbol keeps appearing in the margins of Narvi's text," he noted, pointing to a small rune that resembled an eye with a vertical line through it. "It's not one I recognize from any standard dialect of Khazad-dûm." "A warning mark, perhaps," Ori suggested, finally reaching for the bread Nari had brought. "I've translated enough to understand the general history. According to this journal, during the initial excavation of Khazad-dûm, Durin I discovered a chamber unlike any other, far beneath the lowest mining levels." "What made it unusual?" Nari asked, pulling up a stool to sit beside the older dwarf. "It wasn't carved by dwarven hands," Ori replied, his voice lowering instinctively though they were alone in the chamber. The walls were perfectly smooth, formed from a single piece of stone as if the chamber had been grown rather than built. He turned a page in his translation notes. Durin found an object at its center, a crystalline structure that emitted light without flame and seemed to respond to his presence. Nari's eyes widened. Like the Arkenstone, similar in some ways but different in crucial aspects, the Arkenstone was a jewel, magnificent but passive. This object, what they began calling the heart of the mountain, was described as active, almost alive. Ori took a sip of ale to wet his dry throat. Durin studied it in secret for many years and discovered it contained knowledge, memories, perhaps, from a time before even the firstborn walked Middle-earth. "What kind of knowledge?" Nari asked, leaning forward with rapt attention. Before Ori could answer, heavy footsteps approached the chamber. Balin entered, followed by a dwarf neither Ori nor Nari immediately recognized. The stranger's beard was unusually short for a dwarf, trimmed close to his face, and adorned with rune-etched silver beads. His dark eyes held a piercing quality that made Nari instinctively straighten his posture. "Ori, Nari," Balin greeted them. "This is Kim, recently arrived from the Iron Hills. He brings skills we may find valuable in our current endeavor." Kim bowed slightly. "I understand you've discovered something of great historical significance," he said, his voice deeper than his relatively slight frame would suggest. Ori glanced questioningly at Balin, who nodded in encouragement. "Kim is versed in arts few of our kind still practice," the older dwarf explained. "Some might call him a dwarf sorcerer, though he prefers the term lore keeper. The two are not so different," Kim said with a thin smile. "Knowledge is power, after all, and power mistaken for magic by those who don't understand its source." Nari studied the newcomer with unconcealed curiosity. The existence of dwarf sorcerers was mostly relegated to ancient tales. Even Gandalf the Grey had once remarked that dwarves were remarkably resistant to most forms of enchantment, whether casting or receiving it. "What brings a lore keeper to Khazad-dûm?" Ori asked, carefully covering some of his notes with blank parchment, a subtle gesture that didn't escape Kim's notice. "Lord Balin's colony has attracted attention throughout the dwarf realms," Kim replied. "When word reached the Iron Hills that the chamber of Mazarbul had been reclaimed, I felt called to offer my services." "Called?" Nari echoed skeptically, Kim's dark eyes fixed on the young dwarf. "Our people believe that Mahal guides our hands in craft and stonework. Is it so strange to think he might guide our paths as well?" Balin cleared his throat, breaking the tension that had begun to build. "Kim has studied many ancient texts about Khazad-dûm, including some that speak of what we now seek. His knowledge may prove invaluable." Ori nodded reluctantly and began summarizing what he had translated thus far. As he spoke, Kim's expression remained impassive, betraying neither surprise nor particular interest, until Ori mentioned the compass device. "May I see it?" the lorekeeper asked, a new intensity in his voice. Balin hesitated only briefly before producing the device from a pouch at his belt. In the 3 days since its discovery, the compass had continued to emit a faint blue glow, its needle unwavering in its downward orientation. Kim held out his hand, and Balin placed the compass in his palm. The moment the device touched the lorekeeper's skin, the blue glow intensified dramatically, and the needle began to spin rapidly before settling on a direction that pointed not downward, but toward the eastern halls. "Curious," Kim murmured, his calm demeanor belied by a gleam in his eyes. "It seems the heart has moved since Narvi's time." "Moved?" Balin frowned. "The journal suggests it was fixed in place, in a chamber so deep it nearly reached the roots of the mountain." Kim returned the compass to Balin, the blue light immediately dimming to its previous intensity. Not of its own accord, perhaps, but over the millennia since Durin's time, many have ruled in Khazad-dûm. Not all would have left such a powerful artifact untouched. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as each dwarf contemplated the implications. If the heart had indeed been moved, it raised countless questions about who had moved it and why, and whether its current location might be more accessible or more dangerous. The eastern halls, Nari finally said, breaking the silence. That would place it near the older mining operations beyond the second hall. Ori's brow furrowed as he consulted one of the maps spread across the table. That area has not yet been properly secured. The scouting party Balin sent last month reported signs of orc activity in the lower tunnels. All the more reason to move quickly, Kim suggested. If orcs have sensed the heart's presence, they may seek to claim it for their masters. Balin stroked his beard thoughtfully. Durin's bane drove our people from these halls long ago. If this heart is as powerful as the journal suggests, perhaps it could help us ensure that no such terror ever threatens Khazad-dûm again. Or it could awaken something worse, Ori cautioned, tapping a section of his translation. Narvi writes here of dreams that plagued those who spent too long studying the heart, visions of darkness rising and ancient power stirring. Kim's expression hardened. With respect, Master Ori, our ancestors often cloaked straightforward accounts in mystical language. These dreams could simply be Narvi's poetic way of describing the political tensions of his time. Perhaps, Ori conceded, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. But it would be foolish to dismiss the warnings completely. No one is suggesting we act rashly, Balin said, his authoritative tone settling the brewing disagreement. We will form a small expedition to investigate the eastern halls. Kim's expertise will be valuable, as will Ori's continuing translations of the journal. Nari straightened his shoulders. I would like to join this expedition, Lord Balin. The older dwarf smiled kindly at Durin's descendant. Your enthusiasm does you credit, young Nari, but someone must continue the translation work with Ori. With respect, my lord, Kim interjected. The boy's skills with ancient languages could prove useful in the field. If we encounter inscriptions or markers related to the heart, having a translator present would save valuable time. Balin considered this for a moment before nodding. A fair point. Very well, Nari will join us. Ori, I trust you can manage the translations alone for a time. Of course, Ori replied, though his eyes betrayed concern as they flicked between Nari and Kim. But before you depart, there's something else in the journal you should know. He carefully turned several pages of the original text, stopping at a detailed illustration that depicted the heart itself. The drawing showed a crystalline structure roughly the size of a dwarf's head, with facets that seemed to spiral inward toward a central point of light. Around it, Narvi had drawn various runes and symbols, some of which matched those on the compass device. According to this passage, Ori explained, the heart responds differently to different races. To dwarves, it reveals craft knowledge and ancient memories of Mahal's teachings. To elves, it shows visions of the music of the Aenir and the shaping of Arda. But Narvi mentions a third response. He hesitated, glancing at Kim before continuing. When beings of shadow approached it, servants of the enemy, the heart showed them paths to power and dominion. A test, then, Balin mused, revealing one's true nature and deepest desires. Or a mirror, Kim suggested, reflecting what is already within the beholder. Nari looked between the older dwarves, his youthful face troubled. What would happen if someone with ill intent gained control of it? No one answered immediately. The silence in the chamber grew heavy, broken only by the distant sound of hammers echoing through the vast halls of Khazad-dûm. All the more reason to find it before others do, Balin finally said. "We depart tomorrow at first bell. Ori, continue your translations, focusing on any information about how to safely handle or transport the heart once found." As Balin and Kim left to make preparations, Nari lingered behind with Ori. "You don't trust him," the younger dwarf observed once they were alone. Ori sighed, carefully closing Narvi's journal. "I trust too little, perhaps. My years with Thorin's company left me wary of artifacts that promise great power." "The Arkenstone drove Thorin to madness," Nari acknowledged. "But we are not seeking a crown jewel to establish a claim to rule. The heart seems to be something else entirely." "That's what concerns me," Ori admitted. "The Arkenstone's purpose was clear if dangerous. This heart remains a mystery, and mysteries in the deep places of the world rarely bode well for those who uncover them." He placed a hand on Nari's shoulder. "Keep your wits about you on this expedition. Watch and listen more than you speak. And if anything strikes you as amiss, anything at all, find a way to get word back to me." "You think there will be trouble?" Nari asked, his voice hushed. Ori glanced toward the doorway where Balin and Kim had disappeared. "I think that Lorekeeper knows far more than he's telling us, and knowledge kept secret often serves a purpose beyond what is openly declared." Nari nodded solemnly. "I'll be careful." As the young dwarf departed to prepare for the coming expedition, Ori returned to the ancient journal, searching its pages for anything he might have missed. Any warning or guidance that might protect his friends from whatever awaited them in the eastern depths of Moria. The lantern flames flickered as a draft whispered through the chamber, and for a moment, Ori could have sworn he heard distant, unintelligible voices carried on the cold air. He shivered despite the relative warmth of the room, unable to shake the feeling that they were all being watched by unseen eyes. In the shadows beyond the lantern light, something ancient stirred, awakening to the presence of dwarves in its domain after centuries of undisturbed slumber. The heart called to its seekers, and to other things that dwelled in darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge from the depths. Chapter 3: Depths of Deceit. Dawn in Khazad-dûm was an artificial affair. With no natural light penetrating the mountain's depths, the colony marked morning by the lighting of the great lamps that hung from the vaulted ceilings of the main halls. As the soft glow spread through the corridors, illuminating the intricate carvings that adorned the walls, a small company gathered at the eastern gate of the 21st hall. Balin stood at their head, his white beard neatly braided for the journey ahead. Beside him, Kim checked the contents of his pack one final time, his movements precise and methodical. Nari fidgeted with the straps of his leather armor, nervous energy evident in his youthful frame. Rounding out the expedition were Floy, the sturdy warrior who had helped discover Narvi's chest, and Lonnie, whose locksmithing skills might prove valuable if they encountered more sealed chambers. "The eastern passages twist and turn like a serpent," Balin was explaining, gesturing to a rough map spread before them. "Our scouts mapped the main thoroughfares, but many side tunnels remain unexplored. We'll follow the compass's guidance, but stay alert. These halls have been abandoned for centuries. Who knows what might have taken up residence? Or what traps our ancestors might have left to guard their secrets," Lonnie added, patting a small leather case that contained his collection of delicate tools. "Indeed," Kim agreed, his dark eyes scanning the map with intense focus. "The dwarf kings of old were not careless with their treasures. If the heart was deliberately hidden, we should expect challenges beyond mere locked doors." Nari watched the Lorekeeper carefully, reminded of Ori's warning to observe more than he spoke. There was something about Kim that didn't sit right with him, a certainty in his manner when discussing the heart that seemed at odds with his claim of learning about it only through ancient texts. "We're ready, my lord," Floy reported, handing Balin a sturdy walking staff topped with a crystal that emitted a steady white light. Similar crystals had been mounted on the helmets of each expedition member, leaving their hands free for weapons or tools. Balin nodded and turned to address a sixth figure who had remained silent until now. Ori, you have the watch here. Continue your translations and send runners if you discover anything that might aid our quest. The scribe bowed slightly. May Mahal guide your hammers and keep your paths straight, he said, the traditional blessing carrying extra weight in these uncertain halls. As the expedition prepared to depart, Ori caught Nari's eye and tapped his own journal meaningfully. The message was clear. Record everything, trust your instincts. Nari nodded almost imperceptibly in acknowledgement. With Balin leading the way, the company passed through the eastern archway, leaving behind the relative safety of the colonized sections of Khazad-dûm. The compass in Balin's hand pulsed with blue light, its needle pointing steadily ahead into the gloom. The first few hours of their journey passed uneventfully. The main eastern corridor was broad and high-ceilinged, clearly designed for the transport of mine materials from the deeper workings. Ancient mining carts sat abandoned on stone tracks, their metal components corroded but still recognizable. The walls bore the characteristic chisel marks of dwarf craftsmanship, along with the occasional inscription commemorating productive veins or notable discoveries. These markings speak of the mithril rush during the reign of Durin IV, Nari commented, running his fingers along a particularly elaborate carving. This was the height of Khazad-dûm's prosperity. Indeed, Kim replied, surprising Nari by stopping to examine the inscription more closely. Though prosperity often breeds complacency, it was during this period that the deeper mines were first excavated, those that would eventually disturb what should have remained buried. A chill ran down Nari's spine at these words. You speak of Durin's bane, he said cautiously. Kim's expression remained unreadable, among other things perhaps best left undisturbed. Before Nari could question this cryptic response, Balin called from further ahead. The compass indicates we should take this side passage. The group gathered around a narrower tunnel that branched off from the main corridor, its entrance partially concealed behind a fallen pillar. Unlike the well-crafted main passages, this tunnel had a cruder appearance, as if hastily excavated. This doesn't appear to be original dwarf work, Lonnie observed, examining the rough-hewn walls. More recent and far less skilled. Orcs perhaps, Floy suggested, his hand instinctively moving to the axe at his belt. Possibly, Balin conceded, though the compass points this way nonetheless. Floy, take the lead. Keep your eyes sharp and your axe sharper. The warrior nodded grimly and moved ahead, his crystal headlamp casting long shadows down the irregular tunnel. The rest followed in single file, the passage too narrow for them to walk abreast. The ceiling lowered as they progressed, forcing even the dwarves to stoop slightly. Nari found himself walking directly behind Kim, watching as the lore-keeper occasionally reached out to touch the wall, his fingers tracing patterns that seemed invisible to the others. After one such gesture, Nari was certain he saw a brief flicker of blue light, similar to the compass's glow, emanate from Kim's fingertips. What magic is that? Nari finally whispered, his curiosity overcoming his caution. Kim glanced back, seemingly unsurprised by the question. Not magic, young one. Knowledge. The stone remembers what has passed through these halls. One need only know how to listen. And what does it tell you? Nari pressed. That we are not the first to seek the heart in recent times, Kim replied quietly. Others have passed this way, some not so long ago. Before Nari could inquire further, Floy raised his hand for silence. The warrior had stopped at a point where the tunnel widened into a small chamber. The beam from his headlamp revealed crude symbols scratched into the floor, circular patterns surrounding what appeared to be a stick figure with an exaggerated eye. Orc markings, Floyd confirmed grimly. Recent by the look of them. Balin approached cautiously, holding the compass over the markings. The needle spun wildly for a moment before settling once more in the direction they had been traveling. The heart's influence seems to disturb the compass near these symbols, he observed. Or perhaps the symbols themselves are having an effect, Kim suggested, kneeling to examine the markings more closely. These are not random scratches. This is a dialect of black speech, though cruder than what one might find in Mordor. You can read it, Nari asked, unable to keep the suspicion from his voice. Kim's dark eyes met Nari's. Know your enemy, young dwarf. Those who guard against the shadow must understand its workings. He pointed to the central figure. This indicates a watcher, a sentinel, and these circles represent boundaries or wards. A warning to other orcs, Lonnie suggested. Or a message to their masters, Kim replied. Either way, we should proceed with greater caution. We are entering claimed territory. Balin nodded solemnly. Weapons at the ready, but let us avoid conflict if possible. Our mission is to find the heart, not to engage in needless battle. The group continued through the chamber, stepping carefully around the orc markings. The tunnel beyond narrowed again before abruptly opening into a vast, echoing space that their headlamps could barely illuminate. Durin's beard, Floy whispered in awe as the beams of light revealed glimpses of their surroundings. This must be the Eastern Mining Complex. Unlike the grand architectural achievements of Khazad-dûm's main halls, this was a purely functional space. A massive cavern honeycombed with mining shafts, supported by thick stone pillars where necessary. Abandoned scaffolding clung to the walls, and the remnants of pulley systems hung from the ceiling like skeletal fingers reaching downward. The compass indicates we should descend, Balin said, watching as the needle angled sharply downward. There appear to be intact stairways along the western wall. As they made their way carefully across the uneven floor of the cavern, Nari noticed something peculiar. These tracks, he said, pointing to marks in the dust. They're recent, but they're not orc footprints. Kim examined the tracks. Booted feet heavier than a dwarf. Men, perhaps. Men, in Moria, Floy sounded incredulous. What business would men have in these depths? The same as ours, I would wager, Kim replied coldly. The heart calls to all races, each in their own way. A thought occurred to Nari. The compass, if it was created to find the heart, might there be others like it? A troubling possibility, Balin acknowledged. All the more reason to hasten our pace. Lead on, Floy. The group descended a wide staircase that spiraled down the cavern wall. Unlike the crude tunnel they had traveled earlier, this stairway was unmistakably dwarf-crafted, each step precisely cut, with intricate carvings adorning the inner wall. Despite centuries of abandonment, the craftsmanship remained sound, a testament to the skill of its makers. As they neared the bottom of the staircase, a faint glow became visible far below, not the blue light of the compass, but an orange flicker that suggested torches or fire. "Douse your lights," Balin ordered in a hushed voice. The crystal lamps were quickly covered, plunging the company into near darkness as they continued their descent more cautiously. Without the bright headlamps, Nari's eyes gradually adjusted to the gloom. The orange glow resolved into multiple pinpricks of flame, torches arranged in a rough circle at the base of the cavern. Moving shadows suggested the presence of several figures, though from this distance it was impossible to discern their nature. "What do your keen eyes see, Floy?" Balin whispered. The warrior peered intently at the scene below. Men, as Kim suggested. Perhaps a dozen, armed with crude weapons. They appear to be guarding something in the center of their circle. Or performing some ritual, Kim added. See how they move in patterns around that central object. Balin consulted the compass once more. Its needle pointed directly toward whatever lay at the center of the circle of men. "It seems our quest has encountered competition," he said grimly. "We are 5 against 12, Lonnie calculated. Poor odds even for dwarves of Durin's line. Numbers do not always determine the outcome of confrontation," Kim observed. "There are other ways to achieve our goal." Nari glanced at the lorekeeper with growing unease. "What do you suggest?" "A diversion," Kim replied, reaching into his pack to produce a small leather pouch. "These men are trespassers in dwarf lands. Let them face the wrath of the mountain." He opened the pouch to reveal a fine, silvery powder. "What is that substance?" Balin asked, his voice sharp with sudden concern. "A mixture of my own creation," Kim explained. "Harmless to dwarves, but when ignited, it produces a smoke that disorients men and orcs alike, playing on their fears and weakening their resolve." Nari's suspicion deepened. Such a substance sounded more like wizardcraft than any traditional dwarf lore he knew. "And you just happened to bring this on our expedition." Kim's dark eyes fixed on Nari. "I came prepared for various contingencies, young one, as should any who venture into these depths." Balin studied Kim for a long moment before nodding. "If it can be deployed without alerting them to our precise location, a diversion might allow us to assess the situation more clearly." "Leave that to me," Kim said, producing a small copper tube from another pocket. He carefully poured some of the powder into the tube, then added what appeared to be a small crystal. With practiced movements, he sealed the tube and whispered words in a dialect of Khazad-dûm so ancient that even Nari, with his gift for languages, could only recognize fragments. "Shield your eyes," Kim warned before tossing the tube in a high arc over the stairway railing. It sailed through the darkness, landing with a soft clink at the far side of the cavern floor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like rushing wind, a cloud of shimmering silver smoke erupted from where the tube had fallen. The effect on the men below was immediate and dramatic. Cries of alarm turned to shouts of terror as the smoke engulfed them. Some dropped their torches and fled blindly. Others drew weapons and began striking at unseen foes. "Now is our chance," Kim urged, "while they are scattered and confused." Balin gestured for the company to move forward, but cautiously. "We need to see what they were guarding." As they descended the final portion of the staircase, the chaos below intensified. The silver smoke had spread throughout the cavern floor, thinning as it expanded but still clinging to the men like spectral shrouds. Through gaps in the confusion, Nari caught glimpses of what lay at the center of their circle, a stone pedestal supporting a cloth-wrapped object approximately the size of a dwarf's head. "The heart," he whispered to Balin. "Perhaps," the older dwarf replied, "though I mislike the ease with which these men found it if so." They reached the cavern floor and began making their way toward the center, careful to avoid the disoriented men who stumbled through the silver mist. Kim moved with surprising agility for a dwarf, almost seeming to glide through the chaos. As they neared the pedestal, one of the men, larger than the others and wearing crude armor adorned with bone fetishes, emerged from the smoke directly in their path. Though clearly affected by the disorienting powder, he retained enough awareness to recognize the dwarves as intruders. "Beer drats," he snarled, brandishing a notched sword. "The master warned us you would come." Floy stepped forward, axe raised defensively. "Stand aside, man. You trespass in the realm of Durin's folk." The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the cavern. "Durin's folk. The mountain has new masters now. The heart belongs to him who speaks from shadow." Before any of the dwarves could respond, Kim stepped past Floy, facing the man directly. "What name do you give this master of yours?" he demanded, his voice carrying a strange resonance that Nari had not heard before. The man's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed to struggle against some invisible force. He, he is, a shudder passed through his frame. He is the voice in the deep, the awakener, the... His words cut off abruptly as Kim made a sharp gesture with one hand. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious but still breathing. "What did you do to him?" Nari demanded, staring at Kim in shock. "Spared his life," the lore-keeper replied coldly. "And perhaps saved ours. We haven't time for interrogation. The smoke will not confuse them forever." Balin looked troubled but nodded in agreement. To the pedestal quickly. They reached the stone dais at the center of the cavern floor. Upon it rested what appeared to be a bundle wrapped in stained cloth. The compass in Balin's hand pulsed with intense blue light, confirming that they had found what they sought. "I don't understand," Lonnie said, examining the pedestal. "This is no ancient dwarf work. This stone was dressed recently, within the last few years perhaps. And this cloth is of men's making," Floy added, pointing to the wrappings. "The weave is too crude for elven work, and too thin for dwarven preference." Balin's brow furrowed deeply. Something is not right here. Why would the heart, an artifact of such power and antiquity, be left so poorly guarded on a recently constructed pedestal? "Perhaps because it is not the heart at all," Kim said softly, his dark eyes fixed on the wrapped object, "but rather a lure." A chill ran through the company at these words. "A lure," Nari repeated. "For what purpose?" "To draw us exactly where they wanted us," Kim replied, his voice changing subtly as he spoke, growing deeper, more resonant. "To this place at this time, with the true compass in our possession." Balin's hand moved to his sword, but Kim was faster. With a fluid motion that seemed impossible for a dwarf, he snatched the compass from Balin's grasp. The blue light intensified in his hand, bathing the entire scene in an eerie glow. "You are not what you claim to be," Balin said, his voice steady despite the betrayal. "No dwarf moves as you do, speaks as you do." Kim, or whatever he truly was, smiled, an expression that transformed his face into something alien and terrifying. "No, Lord Balin, I am not what I claim to be. I am something far more ancient, far more invested in the heart's recovery." As the silver smoke began to clear, the company found themselves surrounded by the remaining men, who now moved with purpose rather than confusion. Their eyes were fixed on Kim with expressions of fearful reverence. "The master has the key," one of them murmured, falling to his knees. "The way will open," another chanted, his voice hollow. Nari's mind raced, connecting fragments of lore and legend. The unnatural movements, the command over men's minds, the knowledge of dark tongues. "You're careful with names, young dwarf," Kim cut him off. "They carry power in these deep places." He turned the compass in his hands, studying it with evident satisfaction. "For centuries, I have searched for this. The key to the true heart, not that pale imitation Celebrimbor created for his dwarf friend Narvi." "What are you talking about?" Balin demanded. "The journal speaks clearly of Durin's discovery. The journal tells the story Narvi and Celebrimbor wished to be found," Kim replied. "A clever misdirection, pointing seekers toward a decoy while hiding the path to the genuine artifact." He gestured toward the cloth-wrapped bundle. "That is merely a shard, a fragment of the true heart, powerful enough to aid in finding the whole, but otherwise insignificant." Floyd gripped his axe tighter. "Whatever game you play, creature, you face 4 dwarves of Durin's line. You will not leave this place with our property." Kim sighed, a sound like distant thunder. "Brave but foolish. I have no wish to spill dwarf blood today. It attracts unwelcome attention in these halls. Stand aside, and you may yet return to your colony with a tale to tell. Or we could take back what is ours," Lonnie suggested, his lockpick suddenly replaced by a pair of throwing daggers. A terrible change came over Kim's features, subtle but profound. His eyes darkened until they seemed like pools of liquid shadow, and his voice resonated with power that made the very stone around them vibrate. "You mistake your position, descendants of Durin. I am not asking for your permission." He raised the compass high, and the blue light erupted into a blinding flare that forced the dwarves to shield their eyes. When they could see again, Kim stood atop the pedestal, the cloth bundle now unraveled to reveal a crystalline shard that pulsed with an inner light. It appeared to be a fragment of something larger, with jagged edges where it had been broken from its hole. "Behold," Kim announced, his voice echoing unnaturally through the cavern. "The key to finding what Durin truly discovered, the actual heart of the mountain, not this pale imitation." Balin stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "What are you?" Kim's smile widened. "I am a collector of ancient things, Lord Balin. Some call my kind nameless, others give us titles we did not choose. But in the end, I am simply one who remembers what others have forgotten." "A servant of the enemy," Floyd growled, raising his axe. "The enemy?" Kim laughed, the sound reverberating from the walls. "Such limited vision. The conflicts of elves and men and their supposed dark lords are but ripples on the surface of far deeper waters. The heart was old when Morgoth first set foot upon Middle-earth. It contains knowledge from before the shaping of Arda." Nari watched in horror as Kim placed the compass directly against the crystal shard. The two artifacts resonated together, creating a harmonic tone that sent vibrations through the stone floor. The men surrounding them fell to their knees, covering their ears as blood began to trickle from their noses. "We must stop him," Nari shouted over the rising noise. Balin nodded grimly. "Floyd, left flank. Lonnie, right. Nari, stay behind me." The dwarves moved as one, centuries of shared combat traditions making words unnecessary. Floyd charged directly at Kim, his axe describing a deadly arc through the air. At the same moment, Lonnie sent two throwing daggers hurtling toward the creature's chest. Kim made no move to dodge. Instead, he spoke a single word in a language that hurt Nari's ears, a tongue older and fouler than black speech. The crystal shard flared with blinding intensity, and a shockwave of force knocked all four dwarves backward, sending them sprawling across the cavern floor. "I have waited too long for this moment to be thwarted by the descendants of stone shapers," Kim snarled, all pretense of dwarf-like behavior now abandoned. His movements became fluid, almost serpentine, as he combined the compass and shard in a complex pattern. Stunned but not defeated, Balin struggled to his feet. "What does the heart truly do?" he demanded, trying to buy time as his companions recovered. What power could be worth this deception? Kim paused, the artifacts humming in his hands. "It is not what the heart does, but what it knows. The firstborn of Iluvatar believe they alone remember the music that shaped the world. The dwarves believe they alone know the secrets Alle whispered into stone. But the heart remembers what came before either, the first patterns of creation, the primal templates from which all else was formed." "And what would you do with such knowledge?" Balin asked, his voice steady despite the blood trickling from a cut on his brow. "Restore what was forgotten," Kim replied, his eyes growing distant. "Return to the world what was taken from it when the Valor imposed their order upon chaos." Before Balin could respond, Lonnie had recovered enough to launch another attack. The locksmith hurled his remaining daggers with deadly accuracy, one striking Kim's shoulder, the other grazing his cheek. The creature hissed in pain, black ichor seeping from the wounds. "Enough!" he roared, his voice no longer even remotely dwarf-like. With a gesture, the crystal shard pulsed again, and the floor beneath the pedestal began to crack. "It's a trap!" Floyd shouted, lunging forward in a desperate attempt to reach Kim. Too late. The floor gave way beneath the pedestal, creating a perfectly circular shaft that plunged into darkness. Kim, still holding both artifacts, stepped into the void, not falling but descending as if carried by unseen currents. "If you value your colony, you will not follow," the creature's voice echoed upward. "The true heart lies far deeper than Durin ever dared to mine. In darkness even orcs fear to tread." And then he was gone, vanished into the bottomless shaft, taking with him both the compass and the crystal shard. The men who had served Kim seemed to awaken from a trance. Some fled screaming into the tunnels, others collapsed where they stood, shaking uncontrollably. One man, older than the rest, approached Balin with trembling steps. "We did not know," he said, his voice hoarse with fear. "We believed we served a wise one from the east who promised knowledge and power, but in dreams I saw his true face." The man shuddered. "No man should see such things." Balin regarded him grimly. "How long did you serve this creature?" "3 moons," the man replied. "He came to our village near the east gate, speaking of treasures within the mountain. He wore a different form then, taller, fairer of face, but his eyes were always the same." Nari had made his way to the edge of the newly formed shaft. "I can't see the bottom," he reported. "It seems to curve away eastward as it descends." "We cannot follow without the compass," Lonnie said, binding a wound on his arm. "And even if we could, what hope would we have against such a creature?" Balin stood silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. Finally he turned to his companions. "We return to the colony. We must warn Ori and the others of what we've discovered." "And tell them what?" Floy asked bitterly. "That we were duped by a shapeshifter. That we lost both the compass and the heart fragment. That we faced a power beyond our reckoning," Balin replied solemnly. "And that the dangers lurking beneath Khazad-dûm are greater than we imagined." As they gathered their equipment and prepared for the return journey, Nari couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something far larger and more dangerous than a simple artifact hunt. The creature calling itself Kim had spoken of restoring what was forgotten, returning chaos to order, words that reminded Nari of ancient tales told in hushed voices, of powers that existed before the coming of the Valor. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm had always prided themselves on understanding the mountain, on mastering stone and metal through craft and persistence. But now Nari wondered if the mountain had secrets even the descendants of Durin were not meant to uncover, depths where ancient powers still lingered, waiting for someone to call them back into the world. As they began the long climb back up the staircase, leaving behind the shaft that had swallowed Kim and the artifacts, Nari glanced back one final time. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw a faint blue glow rising from the bottomless dark, pulsing like a heartbeat that had awakened after millennia of slumber. Chapter 4: Echoes of Warning. Ori had not left the chamber of Mazarbul in over 2 days. Surrounded by scattered pages of translations and notes, he had fallen into a fitful sleep at the stone table, his head resting on Narvi's journal. Dreams of darkness and ancient voices had plagued his rest, leaving him restless and uneasy even in slumber. He awoke with a start as the chamber door swung open. For a moment, disoriented between dream and reality, he reached for the dagger he kept concealed in his boot. Then recognition dawned as Balin entered, followed by Floy, Lonnie, and Nari. "You've returned," Ori said, relief washing over him. His relief was short-lived, however, as he took in their appearance. All 4 bore signs of battle, torn clothing, minor wounds, and a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "What happened? Where is Kim?" Kim, Balin spat the name as if it were poison, was not what he appeared to be. Over the next hour, the expedition members recounted their harrowing experience in the eastern mining complex. Ori listened in growing horror as they described Kim's betrayal, the strange crystal shard, and the bottomless shaft that had opened beneath the pedestal. "A shapeshifter," Ori muttered, stroking his beard anxiously. "It explains much." his knowledge of ancient texts, his facility with languages no dwarf should know. He spoke of the heart being older than Morgoth's coming to Middle-earth, Nari added, and of restoring some form of chaos that existed before the valor imposed order. Ori's face paled. Those words, I found something similar in the final pages of Narvi's journal, which I translated during your absence. He shuffled through his notes until he found the relevant passage. Here, Narvi writes, Celebrimbor confided in me his greatest fear, that the heart contains memories not just of creation but of what existed before creation. Patterns of unmaking, templates of chaos that, if understood, could unravel the very fabric Eru wove. And you believe this creature seeks such knowledge? Balin asked gravely. I believe the danger is far greater than we initially understood, Ori replied. There is more. He picked up another sheet of parchment. According to these final entries, Narvi and Celebrimbor created not one but two artifacts. The first, what we've been calling the heart, was indeed a decoy, containing only fragments of the knowledge they discovered. The second, which Celebrimbor called the Luthrin, Sindarin for inner pattern, was the true repository of what they learned from Durin's original discovery. And the compass, Lonnie asked. A key of sorts, Ori explained. Designed to locate the Luthrin, which they hid far deeper than any dwarf had ever delved, in chambers not crafted by our ancestors, but existing before even the mountains took their present form. So Kim now possesses both the compass and a fragment of the decoy heart, Balin summarized, and seeks the true artifact, this Luthrin, in the deepest parts of Khazad-dûm. But why would Narvi and Celebrimbor create any record of this? Floy asked. Why not destroy all knowledge of the true heart's existence? Because they feared it might be needed someday, Ori replied, turning to the final page of his translation. Listen to Narvi's last entry. The Luthrin contains terrible power but also great wisdom. Should a time come when darkness threatens to consume the world entirely, the knowledge within might prove the only counter to absolute destruction. Thus, we leave this record, incomplete as it is, to guide those worthy to find it, but only in the direst need. A somber silence fell over the chamber as the dwarves contemplated these words. Finally, Balin spoke. We must assume this creature, whatever it truly is, intends to use the Luthrin for destructive purposes. Our priority must be to warn the colony and perhaps abandon Khazad-dûm entirely until we can return with greater strength. Abandon Moria, Floy sounded incredulous. After all we've accomplished, 5 years of blood and toil to reclaim our ancestral home. We cannot stand against powers beyond our reckoning, Balin replied wearily. We came to mine mithril and restore dwarf works, not to face creatures from the dawn of time. Before the discussion could continue, they were interrupted by the arrival of a young dwarf guard, who burst into the chamber without ceremony. Lord Balin, he exclaimed, breathing heavily. Scouts report movement at the eastern borders of our territory. Many orcs, hundreds perhaps, moving toward our position. Balin's expression hardened. Has the alarm been sounded? Yes, my lord. The garrison is already preparing defenses at the second and third halls. Good, tell the captains I will join them shortly. As the guard departed, Balin turned back to his companions. It seems our expedition may have stirred more than one nest of hornets. Or perhaps whatever Kim awakened has already begun to affect our surroundings, Ori suggested grimly. The timing cannot be coincidence. Regardless, we must defend the colony, Balin decided. Floy, gather what warriors you can and reinforce the bridge of Khazad-dûm. If the orcs breach our eastern defenses, they must not cross the chasm. Lonnie, see to the evacuation of our non-combatants to the western halls. And us? Nari asked, gesturing to himself and Ori. Balin hesitated, then said, Gather everything we know about the heart, the Luthrin, and Kim. If we survive this attack, that knowledge may prove crucial in the days ahead. And if we fall, his voice grew solemn, ensure that warning reaches Erebor and beyond. As the others departed to carry out their assignments, Ori and Nari began collecting the most critical documents and translations. "There's something I didn't mention in front of the others," Nari said quietly once they were alone. "When Kim spoke of the Heart's Age, of it predating Morgoth's coming, I remembered an old tale told by our grandmother." "About the nameless things?" Ori asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nari nodded. "She spoke of beings that gnawed at the world's foundations, creatures so ancient they had no place in the songs of either elves or men. She said they remembered shapes the world had worn before the coming of light." "Gandalf once hinted at such things," Ori recalled. "During our journey with Thorin, he mentioned depths where even he feared to go, places beneath mountains where nameless things dwelled." "If Kim serves such powers," Nari continued, "or is himself one of them, then Khazad-dûm faces a threat greater than any orc horde," Ori finished grimly. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of war horns, followed by the unmistakable clash of weapons and battle cries. The orc attack had begun. "We must hurry," Ori urged, stuffing the most crucial documents into a leather satchel. "The Book of Mazarbul must be preserved as well. Perhaps those who find it will understand the warning." As Nari gathered the last of their materials, a deep rumble shook the chamber, causing dust to rain down from the ceiling. "That was no orc weapon," he said, fear evident in his voice. "No," Ori agreed. "Whatever Kim has awakened, I fear it stirs far below us." The two dwarves hurried from the chamber of Mazarbul, navigating corridors now filled with the sounds of battle and the acrid smell of smoke. They passed groups of warrior dwarves rushing toward the eastern defenses, their axes and hammers glinting in the lamplight. As they reached the 21st Hall, a scene of chaos greeted them. Dwarf families gathered what possessions they could carry, preparing to retreat to the western halls as instructed. Officers shouted orders, organizing defensive positions and evacuation routes. "Nari, Ori," Balin's voice called from across the hall. The older dwarf was fully armored now, his white beard tucked into his mail collar, his helmet bearing the crest of Durin's line. "The situation has worsened. Our scouts report the orcs are being led by a cave troll of unusual size, and they've already breached the 5th hall." "What would you have us do?" Ori asked, clutching the satchel of documents. Balin's eyes grew sorrowful. "I had hoped to send you west with the evacuation, but our scouts report orc parties from the north as well. The western route may soon be cut off." He gestured to a nearby passage. "There is another way through the southern mines. It is longer and more hazardous, but it may yet remain clear of enemies." "You mean for us to abandon the colony?" Nari asked incredulously. "I mean for you to survive," Balin replied firmly. "To carry warning to Erebor, to Dane, and perhaps even to Elrond in Rivendell. What we face here may threaten more than just Khazad-dûm." Another tremor shook the hall, stronger than the first. Cracks appeared in one of the massive pillars supporting the vaulted ceiling. "That comes from below," Balin murmured, his expression grim. "Whatever Kim sought is stirring." In that moment, a strange silence fell over the hall. The clamor of battle seemed to recede, replaced by an unnatural quiet that pressed against their ears like a physical force. Many of the dwarves froze in place, sensing that something terrible approached. Then they heard it, a sound unlike any other, a rhythmic thudding that resonated through stone and bone alike. It was as if the mountain itself had developed a heartbeat, slow and immensely powerful, sending vibrations through the very foundations of Khazad-dûm. "By Durin's beard," Balin whispered, his face ashen. "He's found it, the true heart." Before any of them could respond, the silence was shattered by screams from the eastern passage. A dwarf soldier stumbled into the hall, his armor charred and smoking, his beard singed away. Fire, he gasped, collapsing to his knees. Shadow and flame. Balin's expression transformed from fear to grim resolve. So it has come again, he said quietly. Durin's bane awakens. The Balrog, Ori breathed, terror etched into his features. But how, why now? Perhaps awakened by the stirring of the heart, Balin suggested. Or perhaps deliberately roused by Kim to serve his purpose. The rhythmic thudding grew louder, now accompanied by a deep rumbling that seemed to come from all directions at once. The floor beneath their feet began to tremble continuously. There's no time for speculation, Balin decided. Ori, Nari, you must go now through the southern passage. Take the documents, take my ring as proof of my authority and make for the surface. Tell Dane what has transpired here. And you, Nari asked, tears welling in his eyes. I will join the defense at the bridge, Balin replied, drawing his sword. We will buy you as much time as we can. The sounds of battle grew louder from the east, but now mixed with new sounds. The roar of flame and the screams of dying dwarves. The terror of the First Age had returned to Khazad-dûm. Go, Balin commanded, embracing each of them briefly. Durin's blood must survive to warn others. With heavy hearts, Ori and Nari turned toward the southern passage. As they reached its entrance, Ori looked back one last time. Balin stood amidst the chaos, rallying the remaining warriors around him, his white beard and gleaming blade making him a beacon of defiance in the growing darkness. It would be the last time they saw him alive. The southern passage twisted and descended through lesser-known parts of Khazad-dûm. Unlike the grand architecture of the main halls, these were functional mining tunnels, roughly hewn and only sparsely illuminated by the few light crystals the colonists had installed during their reclamation efforts. We should be nearing the southeastern watchtower, Nari said after they had traveled for what seemed like hours. From there, we can access the high pass that leads. He fell silent as a new sound reached them, a soft, rhythmic tapping from somewhere ahead. It was not the ponderous thudding of the awakened heart, but something more deliberate, almost like a code. Orcs, Ori whispered, drawing his dagger. I don't think so, Nari replied, his keen ears straining to interpret the pattern. It's too precise, too purposeful. They advanced cautiously, the tapping growing louder as they approached a junction where their tunnel met a broader corridor. Flattening themselves against the wall, they peered around the corner and froze in shock. In the center of the corridor stood a figure that resembled Kim in basic form, but moved with even less pretense of dwarf-like characteristics. Its body seemed to flow rather than walk, and its limbs bent at angles that made both dwarves nauseous to observe. It was tapping a long, jointed finger against the stone wall, producing the rhythmic sounds they had heard. More disturbing still was what happened where it touched the stone. With each tap, faint lines of blue light spread outward, forming complex geometric patterns that writhed and shifted as if alive. The patterns reminded Nari of the compass's glow, but corrupted somehow, twisted into forms that hurt the eye to follow. It's changing the stone, Ori breathed in horror, rewriting its very structure. The creature paused in its work, head tilting at an impossible angle. Dwarves, it said, its voice a sibilant whisper that somehow carried clearly to their hiding place. I can smell Durin's blood in your veins. Nari grabbed Ori's arm, pulling him back into the tunnel they had come from. Run, he hissed. Back to the junction. We'll take the eastern fork. They fled as quietly as they could, but not quietly enough. Behind them they heard the creature's voice calling after them, mocking and terrible. Run, children of Aule. Run while you can. The heart awakens, and with it, the memory of what this world was meant to be before the valor imposed their limited vision upon it. The tunnel forked ahead, and without hesitation, they took the eastern path, hoping to circle around and eventually reach the southeastern watchtower by another route. Their path now sloped upward, which they took as a hopeful sign. Any route to the surface would need to ascend eventually. After several minutes of frantic travel, they paused to catch their breath. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but the steady, deep thudding continued to resonate through the stone around them, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That wasn't Kim," Nari said between gasps for air. "Similar, but worse. One of his kin, perhaps," Ori suggested. "Or another form he can take. We know so little of these nameless things and their capabilities." What did he mean about what this world was meant to be? Nari wondered. Before Ori could respond, a new tremor shook the tunnel, more violent than any they had felt before. Cracks appeared in the ceiling and dust showered down upon them. "The structural integrity of these tunnels is compromised," Ori warned. "If the tremors continue." The words had barely left his mouth when a deafening crack split the air. A section of the tunnel ceiling collapsed ahead of them, blocking their path with rubble and stone. "Back!" Nari shouted, pulling Ori away as more debris rained down. "We'll have to find another route." They retreated to the junction and took the remaining fork, which led deeper into the mountain rather than upward as they had hoped. It was a risk, but with their original path blocked and the creature potentially still behind them, they had little choice. This new tunnel showed signs of greater age than those they had traversed previously. The chisel marks on the walls were in a style not used by dwarves for thousands of years, and the occasional runes carved into support beams were in a dialect of Khazad-dûm so ancient that even Ori, with his scholarly knowledge, could only recognize fragments. "These workings date back to the Second Age, perhaps even earlier," he noted as they hurried forward. "We're entering parts of Khazad-dûm that even Balin's colony had not yet reclaimed." The thudding heartbeat of the mountain grew more insistent as they descended, reverberating through the stone until it seemed to synchronize with their own racing pulses. The air grew warmer too, carrying a strange scent. Neither the sulphurous reek of forges nor the dank mustiness of abandoned mines, but something more primal, like the breath of the earth itself. They emerged suddenly into a vast cavern, so large that their light crystals could not illuminate its boundaries. The floor descended in broad, natural terraces toward a central depression shrouded in shadow. The heartbeat sound was loudest here, emanating from that central darkness. "What is this place?" Nari whispered, his voice swallowed by the immensity of the space. Ori studied the nearest wall, where veins of some luminous mineral traced patterns through the stone. "I've never seen its like described in any record of Khazad-dûm. This chamber may predate even Durin's arrival." As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, details of the cavern became clearer. The terraces were not natural formations as they had first appeared, but deliberately shaped, though not by any dwarf craft either of them recognized. The patterns were too fluid, too organic, lacking the geometric precision that characterized dwarf architecture. "I don't think we should linger here," Nari said uneasily, eyeing the shadowed depression at the cavern's center. "Agreed," Ori replied. "Look, there appears to be another tunnel entrance on the far side, slightly elevated. If we skirt around the edge of the chamber, we might reach it without descending closer to whatever lies below." They began to make their way cautiously along the uppermost terrace, keeping as far from the central depression as possible. Yet despite their efforts to move quietly, their footsteps echoed in the vast space, creating overlapping patterns of sound that seemed to converse with the constant thudding from below. They had traversed perhaps half the circumference of the chamber when Nari froze, grabbing Ori's arm. "Listen," he hissed. For a moment, Ori heard nothing beyond the persistent heartbeat. Then he noticed the rhythm had changed. Where before it had been steady and unvarying, now it followed a more complex pattern, almost like language. Thud, thud thud, thud, thud thud thud. The sound was coming faster now, more insistent, and it was no longer emanating solely from the central depression. The entire chamber had begun to pulse with it, the luminous veins in the walls glowing brighter with each beat. "It knows we're here," Ori whispered, clutching the satchel of documents tighter against his chest. "We need to run, now." They abandoned all pretense of stealth, sprinting along the terrace toward the distant tunnel entrance. Behind them, something stirred in the darkness of the central depression, something vast and ancient, awakening from slumber to the presence of intruders in its domain. A pale blue light began to rise from the center of the chamber, illuminating the cavern in an eerie glow that cast no shadows. In that light, the true nature of the chamber became horribly clear. The terraces were not stone at all, but massive ribs curving upward to meet at a distant ceiling. The luminous veins were not minerals but something more akin to blood vessels, pulsing with energy rather than fluid. They were not in a cavern, they were inside a living entity of unimaginable size. "Don't look back," Ori shouted as they reached the tunnel entrance. "Just run." They plunged into the passage, which was not crafted stone but something that resembled a massive artery, its walls lined with the same pulsing vessels they had seen in the chamber. The heartbeat sound was all around them now, deafening in its intensity, driving them forward with the primal fear of prey fleeing a predator. How long they ran, neither could later recall. The passage branched multiple times, and they chose directions blindly, caring only to put distance between themselves and the awakening presence behind them. Eventually, the organic tunnel began to give way to more familiar dwarf-crafted passages, though these too were ancient beyond reckoning. When they finally stopped, gasping for breath in a small antechamber lined with dusty storage niches, the heartbeat had faded to a distant throbbing. "What was that?" Nari managed between desperate gulps of air. Ori leaned against a wall, his legs trembling with exhaustion and terror. I think we found the true heart of the mountain." "That was no artifact," Nari objected. "That was alive." "Perhaps that's what Narvi and Celebrimbor discovered," Ori suggested, his scholarly mind already trying to make sense of the horror they had witnessed. Not an object containing knowledge, but a conscious entity, something that remembered the world's formation. "And Kim sought to awaken it," Nari added grimly, "to restore what was forgotten." Before they could discuss further, a new sound reached them, the unmistakable clanking of armor and weapons. Both dwarves tensed, preparing for yet another threat, but the voices that accompanied the sounds spoke in the familiar cadences of Khazad-dûm. "Hello," Ori called out cautiously, "fellow dwarves." A moment later, 3 armored figures entered the antechamber, axes raised defensively. Upon seeing Ori and Nari, they lowered their weapons slightly. "Identify yourselves," the lead dwarf commanded, his accent marking him as from the Iron Hills. "I am Ori, son of Rai, scribe to Balin's colony," Ori replied, standing straighter despite his exhaustion. "And this is Nari, grandson of Dori. We bear urgent messages from Lord Balin concerning grave dangers awakened beneath Khazad-dûm." The leader removed his helmet, revealing a face lined with age and battle scars. "I am Nain, captain of the Eastern Watch under King Dane Ironfoot. We've been searching the upper passages for survivors." "Survivors?" Nari echoed, hope and dread mingling in his voice. "Then you know of Balin's colony." Nain's expression darkened. "We received word from a lone survivor who reached the East Gate 3 days past, a dwarf named Floy, grievously wounded and half-mad with horror. He spoke of shadow and flame rising from the depths, of dark sorcery and ancient evil awakened. Floy lives," Ori's voice cracked with emotion. "And the others, Balin, Lonnie." Nain shook his head solemnly. "Floy reported that Balin fell defending the bridge of Khazad-dûm, As for the others, he knew not their fate. After delivering his message, he succumbed to his wounds. Ori's shoulders slumped with grief. Then we may be all that remains of Balin's company. What brought you so deep into these ancient workings? Nain asked. These passages haven't seen dwarf boots in 1,000 years or more. Briefly, Ori recounted their flight from the colony and their terrifying encounter with both the shape-shifting creature and the living heart of the mountain. As he spoke, Nain's expression grew increasingly troubled. "These nameless things you describe," the older dwarf said when Ori had finished, "they are not unknown to the lore-keepers of Erebor. There are ancient warnings carved in the deepest halls, warnings to never delve too greedily or too deep, lest we disturb what slumbers beneath the mountains. The same warning that went unheeded when the Balrog was awakened," Nari noted bitterly. "And now something potentially worse stirs in the depths," Nain concluded. "King Dane must be informed immediately." He turned to his companions. "We make for the surface without delay. Send word to the other search parties to withdraw." "You came seeking survivors?" Ori asked as they prepared to depart. Nain nodded grimly. "When Floy reached us with news of the colony's fall, Dane dispatched several companies to search for survivors and assess the threat. My group was tasked with exploring these eastern reaches." "How many of your people are within Khazad-dûm?" Nari asked. "Too many," Nain replied darkly. "Nearly 100 warriors spread throughout the upper levels. If what you've seen is true, if this heart continues to awaken, none of us may be safe within these halls." As if in answer to his words, a tremor shook the chamber, stronger than any they had felt before. Dust and stone fragments rained down from the ceiling. "The entire mountain is becoming unstable," one of Nain's companions observed nervously. The shorter passages. Chapter 5. The burden of knowledge. The journey to Erebor was arduous, made more so by the constant fear of pursuit. Though they saw no sign of the creature that had called itself Kim, nor any indication that the disturbance in Khazad-dûm had spread beyond the mountain, Ori and Nari moved with the caution of those who had glimpsed terrors beyond mortal understanding. They traveled northward along the eastern slopes of the Misty Mountains, avoiding the main roads where possible. Game was plentiful enough that they did not starve, though both longed for proper dwarf fare rather than the lean meat and wild plants that sustained them. Each night, Ori would carefully check the contents of his satchel, ensuring that Narvi's journal and his translations remained intact. These documents had become more than mere records. They were perhaps the only warning Middle-earth would have of the awakened threat. On the 14th day of their journey, they crested a ridge and caught their first glimpse of Erebor in the distance. The lonely mountain, reclaimed from Smaug years earlier by the company they had been part of alongside Thorin Oakenshield. The sight brought bittersweet memories and a renewed sense of purpose. "Home," Nari murmured, his young face showing the wear of their hard journey and the horrors they had witnessed. "Not yet," Ori cautioned. "We're still days away, and we must consider carefully how to present what we've learned. Even Dane, who sent search parties into Khazad-dûm, may struggle to believe the full truth of what we encountered." "Would he not have felt the tremors?" Nari asked. "Surely such a disturbance would have been noticed throughout the region." Ori shook his head. "The Misty Mountains and many leagues separate Erebor from Khazad-dûm, and we've seen no evidence during our journey that the effects have spread beyond Moria itself, at least not yet." They continued toward Erebor with renewed determination, pushing their tired bodies to cover more ground each day. As they drew closer to the mountain, they began to encounter trade caravans and travelers along the roads, from whom they learned that no word of Khazad-dûm's fate had yet reached the kingdom under the mountain. The search parties never returned, an old merchant told them when they carefully inquired about news from the west. "King Dane has sent messengers to Dale and even to the woodland realm, seeking any tidings of them, but none have come. This news only hastened their pace. By the time they reached the gates of Erebor 5 days later, both dwarves were exhausted but resolute. The guards recognized them immediately. Ori's participation in the reclamation of Erebor had made him well known, and Nari's resemblance to his grandfather Dori was unmistakable. "Master Ori," one of the guards exclaimed, "we had word you joined Lord Balin's colony in Khazad-dûm years ago. What brings you back to Erebor?" "Urgent tidings for King Dane," Ori replied gravely. "We must speak with him without delay." The seriousness of his tone and the haggard appearance of both travelers convinced the guards to act quickly. They were escorted through the magnificent halls of Erebor, a stark contrast to the twisted, corrupted chambers they had fled in Moria, to a small antechamber where they were asked to wait while word was sent to the king. "It's strange," Nari said softly as they sat on stone benches, dwarf-crafted lanterns illuminating the space around them. "After what we've seen, even these solid walls feel less permanent somehow." Ori nodded in understanding. "Once you've witnessed stone flow like water, it's difficult to trust in the stability of anything." Their contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of a richly dressed dwarf with a forked beard, adorned with golden clasps. "Borin, steward to King Dane," he introduced himself with a formal bow. "His Majesty is currently in council, but will receive you as soon as possible. In the meantime, he has instructed me to offer you refreshment and to hear a summary of your tidings, that he might be prepared for your full report." Ori exchanged a glance with Nari. How could they possibly summarize what they had experienced? What portions of their tale would sound most credible, and what might be dismissed as hallucinations born of terror? "We bring word of Balin's colony in Khazad-dûm," Ori began carefully. "It has fallen. Balin himself is dead, as are most if not all of the colonists." Borin's expression grew solemn. "This is grave news indeed, though not entirely unexpected. After Captain Nain's search party failed to return, many feared the worst. What befell the colony? Orcs. Some accident of mining. If only it were so simple," Ori replied. "The truth is far worse. Something ancient has awakened in the deepest parts of Khazad-dûm, something that predates even Durin's arrival in those halls. We bear documents that explain what little is known of this threat." The steward's brow furrowed with concern. "I see. This is indeed a matter for the king's immediate attention." He gestured to waiting servants. "Bring food and drink for our guests, and fresh clothing. Then inform His Majesty that their tidings may require the council's extended consideration." While they ate and washed away the grime of their journey, Borin sent various messengers scurrying through the halls of Erebor. Within an hour, they were escorted to the king's council chamber, a circular room dominated by a massive stone table, inlaid with mithril veins that mapped the known lands of Middle-earth. King Dane Ironfoot sat at the head of the table, his red beard now streaked with gray, but his bearing no less commanding than when he had arrived with his armies to aid in the Battle of 5 Armies. Around him sat his closest advisors, including his son Thorin III and representatives from Dale and Esgaroth. "Ori, son of Rai," Dane greeted them formally, "and young Nari, your return from Khazad-dûm brings both relief that some survived and dread at what tidings you might carry. Speak freely. All here are trusted allies." Ori stepped forward, placing his satchel carefully on the table. "King Dane, lords and representatives of Dale and Esgaroth, what I must tell you will strain belief. Were I not bearing written evidence and accompanied by a witness, I would scarce believe it myself." Over the next hour, Ori recounted their experiences in Khazad-dûm, beginning with the discovery of Narvi's chest and the strange compass it contained. He explained the deception of the creature calling itself Kim, the truth behind the heart of the mountain, and the awakening of something ancient and terrible in the deepest reaches of Moria. He described the transformation of stone itself, the confrontation with the Balrog, and their narrow escape from the mountain as reality began to unravel within its halls. Throughout his account, the council members' expressions ranged from skepticism to outright disbelief, until Ori produced Narvi's journal and his own translations. These documents detail what Narvi and Celebrimbor discovered during the Second Age, he explained, carefully opening the ancient text to reveal its perfect preserved pages. They found something they called the LOTR, the true heart of the mountain, and recognized it as a living remnant of the world's earliest formation, before the Valor gave Arda its current shape. Dane's chief lore master, a venerable dwarf named Froin, examined the journal with trembling hands. "This is genuine," he confirmed after studying several pages. "The materials, the script, these cannot be forged, and these diagrams." He pointed to intricate illustrations showing what appeared to be transformations of matter from one state to another. "These depict principles that go beyond any craft known to our people. If what you say is true," Dane said slowly, his fingers drumming on the table, "then Khazad-dûm harbors a threat unlike any we have faced before. Not mere orcs or trolls, nor even a Balrog, but something that threatens the very structure of the world itself." "That is our fear," Ori confirmed. "The creature, whatever it truly was, spoke of restoring the world to chaos, of awakening others like the heart throughout the deep places of the earth. If it succeeds, the consequences would extend far beyond the lands of dwarves," concluded the representative from Dale, a serious-faced woman who had remained silent until now. "All of Middle-earth would be affected. The question before us," Thorin III spoke up, "is what can be done? If Khazad-dûm has been corrupted as you describe, what force could possibly enter it and neutralize this threat?" A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. The magnitude of what they faced seemed to defy conventional solutions. No army of dwarves, however brave, could battle against the unraveling of reality itself. "There is lore in Rivendell that might offer guidance," Ori suggested after a moment. "Lord Elrond has studied the ancient histories of Middle-earth for thousands of years. If anyone might know how to counter such a threat, it would be the elves. Or perhaps Gandalf the Grey," Nari added. "He has knowledge of powers beyond the ordinary." Dane nodded thoughtfully. "Both suggestions have merit. We must seek wisdom from those versed in matters beyond stone and metal." He turned to his steward. "Borin, prepare messages for Lord Elrond of Rivendell and for Gandalf, if he can be found. Explain the situation in full detail and request their counsel." "What of the White Council?" asked the representative from Esgaroth. "Surely a threat of this magnitude would concern them." "The White Council has not convened in many years," Dane replied. "But yes, if there was ever a time for them to gather again, this would be it." He looked back to Ori. "How quickly do you believe this threat will spread beyond Khazad-dûm?" Ori frowned. "That is difficult to judge. During our escape, the effects seemed contained within the mountain itself. But the creature spoke of the heart's consciousness extending to other deep places of the world, awakening others of its kind. It could be years before the corruption spreads visibly, or days. Without understanding what truly awakened, we cannot predict its actions. Then we must prepare for the worst while seeking better answers," Dane decided. "I will send scouts to monitor the regions surrounding Khazad-dûm for any signs of spreading corruption. Meanwhile, our lore masters will study these documents thoroughly, searching for any clue that might lead to a solution." The meeting continued late into the night, with plans made for various contingencies and messengers prepared for urgent journeys to distant realms. Through it all, Ori felt the weight of responsibility bearing down upon him. He had escaped Khazad-dûm with knowledge that might save Middle-earth, or might prove utterly insufficient against the horror they had unleashed. 3 days later, Ori stood atop one of Erebber's watchtowers, gazing westward toward the distant silhouette of the misty mountains. Nari joined him, carrying a small bundle of provisions. The messengers to Rivendell departed at dawn, the younger dwarf reported. Dane assigned his swiftest riders with fresh horses stationed along the route. They should reach Lord Elrond within a fortnight, weather permitting. Ori nodded absently, his eyes still fixed on the western horizon. And what of the scouts sent toward Khazad-dûm? The first group left yesterday. They're to approach no closer than the eastern banks of the Anduin, observing from a safe distance. Nari hesitated, then added, Dane offered me a place among them. This drew Ori's attention away from the distant mountains. And you accepted. I did, Nari admitted. I must see for myself what becomes of Moria. I need to know if... He trailed off, but Ori understood. If Balin's death and all the others served any purpose, he finished softly. If their sacrifice bought the time needed to warn the world. Yes. Nari squared his shoulders, looking more like his grandfather than ever in that moment of determination. And because someone who has seen the truth must guide those who haven't. The scouts need at least one among them who understands what to look for. Ori placed a hand on the younger dwarf's shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud, as am I. But be cautious, Nari. Whatever awakened in Khazad-dûm is beyond our understanding. Do not take unnecessary risks. I won't, Nari promised. We depart in 2 days. Dane's lore master Froin has prepared sensing devices based on descriptions in Narvi's journal. Instruments that might detect disturbances in the natural order before they become visible to the eye. A wise precaution, Ori nodded. And what of you? I notice you carry provisions, yet you're not dressed for travel. Nari smiled sadly. These aren't for me. They're for you. He held out the bundle. The messengers to Thranduil leave at midday, and Dane mentioned you had requested to accompany them. Ori accepted the provisions with a small nod. I did. The Woodland Realm has extensive ancient archives that might contain references to these nameless things or to disruptions in the world's fabric from ages past. While Dane's lore masters are thorough, the elves have preserved knowledge from times before dwarves walked Middle-earth. So we both venture forth again, Nari observed, each seeking answers in our own way. The burden of knowledge carries responsibilities, Ori replied. Having seen what lurks beneath Khazad-dûm, we cannot simply return to our peaceful lives while others remain ignorant of the danger. They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching as clouds gathered around the distant peaks of the misty mountains. Whether ordinary weather or some manifestation of the changes occurring within Moria, neither could say. There is one question that has troubled me since our escape, Nari finally said. Why did the creature reveal its plans to us? Why explain what the heart truly was, what it intended to accomplish? If it sought to transform the world in secret, why speak so openly? Ori had pondered this same question during many sleepless nights since their return to Erebber. I believe it no longer cared for secrecy. Once the heart was fully awakened, perhaps it felt no power in Middle-earth could stop the transformation. He paused, considering. Or perhaps there was pride involved, the desire to have witnesses understand the magnitude of what was occurring. Even beings of chaos may crave recognition for their works. Or perhaps, Nari suggested more ominously, it wanted us to spread fear, to weaken resistance by spreading tales of an unstoppable force. All the more reason for us to seek knowledge rather than give in to despair, Ori replied firmly. Celebrimbor and Narvi found a way to contain this power once before. Others may help us do so again. The distant tolling of bells from Dale signaled the approach of midday. Ori gathered his small pack and the provisions Nari had brought. Until we meet again, grandson of Dori, he said formally, touching his forehead in the traditional dwarf gesture of respect. Nari returned the gesture. "May your beard grow ever longer, Ori son of Rai, and may we both find what we seek." As Ori descended from the watchtower to join the messengers bound for the woodland realm, he found his thoughts turning to Balin. The older dwarf had led their colony with courage and wisdom, seeking to reclaim the ancient glory of Khazad-dûm. Instead, they had unwittingly set in motion events that threatened all of Middle-earth. Yet even in failure, Balin had shown the true spirit of Durin's folk. When faced with overwhelming danger, he had prioritized warning others above all else, sacrificing himself to buy time for knowledge to escape the mountain. Now that burden of knowledge rested on Ori's shoulders, and on Nari's, and soon on those of leaders and wise ones throughout the free peoples of Middle-earth. In the satchel at his side, Narvi's journal and the translations represented both their greatest hope and a terrible responsibility. The ancient text contained hints of how the heart had been contained before, scattered among observations and warnings that had gone unheeded. Perhaps within those pages lay the seed of salvation, if only they could interpret them correctly. As Erebor fell behind him and the path toward Mirkwood stretched ahead, Ori found a strange resolve settling over him. The horrors he had witnessed in Khazad-dûm would never leave him. The sight of stone flowing like water, the impossible geometries taking shape, the living pulse of something vast and ancient stirring from slumber. These memories would haunt his dreams for whatever years remained to him. But alongside the horror grew a determination that Balin's sacrifice would not be in vain. The knowledge they had preserved would serve as a beacon, guiding the wise of Middle-earth toward understanding the threat, and perhaps discovering how to contain it once more. The sun reached its zenith as Ori and the messengers crossed the bridge spanning the river running. Behind them, Erebor stood proud and solid against the sky, a monument to dwarven craft and perseverance. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the faint hope of answers hidden in ancient elven lore. Whatever came, the lost journals of Moria would speak their warning to any who would listen. The awakening had begun in darkness, but knowledge would carry that truth into the light, where the free peoples of Middle-earth might yet find a way to preserve the world they knew from dissolving back into primordial chaos. As tales were told in later years, some said that Ori's mission to the woodland realm bore fruit, uncovering ancient elven records of similar disturbances during the First Age. Others claimed that Nari's scouting party discovered methods to counteract the spreading corruption, using principles derived from Narvi's own writings. Still, others maintained that the White Council eventually gathered, and with Gandalf's guidance, performed rituals that sealed Khazad-dûm more completely than ever before, containing the awakened power within. The full truth remained known only to those directly involved, recorded in archives accessible to few. But this much became common knowledge among the dwarves. Khazad-dûm, once called Moria, would remain abandoned for ages to come, not just because of the Balrog that lurked in its depths, but because of something far older and more dangerous that had awakened beneath even that ancient evil. And in the deepest halls of Erebor, in a chamber accessible only to the king and his most trusted advisors, Narvi's journal remained safely preserved as both warning and testament, a record of knowledge hard-won, and a reminder that some depths should never be disturbed, no matter what treasures they might contain. For even stone has memory, and mountains keep their secrets for reasons beyond the understanding of those who dwell upon them. In the silence of the deep places, ancient things still slumber, and wisdom lies in letting them rest undisturbed.